Okay, welcome to our session. I'm very happy to be able to welcome you here today. Unfortunately, we're not able to meet in Leipzig as was planned, but for that, at least we have this very innovative platform to share our content with you. My name is Karl Eckert. I work at the German Environmental Agency, mainly in the Stadt-Land-Plus measure, funding measure, which you may have heard of before in the conference. And I would like to warmly welcome you to our session. This session is jointly organized by the Joint Research Center and the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, otherwise known as CEMR. Before I get into the content of the session, I would like to explain how we would like to interact with you as participants. We have two options which we will use during the session. On the top right of your screen, you'll see the option for polls. We have put some introductory questions for you, and we would like to know in what field do you work in, and if you are active in the use of indicators in your everyday work. If you can please fill this out, preferably now, if possible. Just go to the top right of your screen, and you'll be able to fill those out, and we'll show the results later in the session. Furthermore, of course, please use the chat. We will gladly take up your questions as they come in and present them to the speakers. So we are going to talk about SDGs, indicators, and evaluation tools within this session. We have some very exciting speakers lined up for you who I will announce in a second. It's a very timely discussion to have, given how the EU and the German presidency is moving at full speed for the finalization of the Leipzig Charter, which is set to be signed in December of this year. We heard from Professor Weidner yesterday during the keynote speaker about the challenges this charter looks to address, namely globalization, climate change, resource scarcity, migration, and many more. And of course, the coronavirus pandemic, which we're currently experiencing, adds an entire new level to the complexity of the situation. We have now entered into a decade of action. We as a society need to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 agenda and the 17 SDGs which are related to it. As we know, we have all the SDGs have a territorial dimension, and over 60% of the goals need to be implemented at a local level if we want to achieve these ambitions. And for this reason, I'm very excited to have the speakers that we have today so they can show us the way towards achieving those goals. So the purpose of today's session is to share some existing examples of tools, such as the JRC Handbook for SDG Voluntary Local Reviews, or the CEMR Reference Framework for Sustainable Cities. Our session will also give insight into the current research on SDG indicators and digitalization as well. As we are increasingly seeing, especially in 2020, digital technologies can influence SDG implementation in many different ways. This will also be shown in a presentation from the German Future Earth Network and a science practice project on localizing the SDGs in Berlin. So once again, I invite you to take part in the poll at the top right of your screen, and I will get into introducing our first speaker. Our first speaker is Alice Siragusa. She will present on how to monitor the implementation of the SDGs in European cities. Alice, if you can please start to share your screen so that the other presenters can see, or the other participants can see. Alice Siragusa is the team leader of the JRC project on localizing SDGs. In the Territorial Development Unit, she focuses on knowledge support to urban policies, and she is also co-authoring the European Handbook for SDGs Voluntary Local Reviews. She holds a PhD in regional and urban planning from the Sapienza University of Rome. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction and for introducing the session. I'm really glad and happy to be here today, and welcome to all the participants. I will present this work before going into the full content of the presentation. I would like to explain you briefly What is the JRC? The JRC mission is to support with knowledge and information all the policies of the EU, in particular, of course, of the ones of the Commission. It has the headquarters in Brussels and the research facilities in 5 member states. I'm based now in Seville, in Spain. And the work that the content of the presentation is really to explain you in brief what are the voluntary local reviews, and how we see these reviews as a tool to not only for the monitoring but also for the full process of localization of the SDGs, and the work that we have done in particular for the preparation of the European Handbook for SDG voluntary local reviews. So first, what are the voluntary local reviews? The voluntary local review as a sort of adaptation of the voluntary national reviews that member states committed to provide periodically to the UN General Assembly for Sustainable Development. The first cities in the world to present a voluntary local review to the HLPF was New York, but already 1 year before, in 2017, the Basque Country presented its own review. So we can say that the process really also started in Europe. Now this is the picture of most of the VLRs already published, but there are a lot more in preparation. More than 100 cities already committed to present a voluntary local review next year. Why we think that the process of monitoring can really help also in the localization. First, because in the monitoring you of course highlight successes and gaps in the processes, but also you use knowledge to and evidences to inform better decision. The monitoring enabled to benchmark and have process of peer-to-peer learning, but it's also part of a global movement and community. We also think that in particular in Europe, these tools might help in highlighting the roles of cities in the implementation of EU policy, for example, the European Green Deal. When using a VLR, cities can really have a number of benefits, both internal in terms of highlighting hidden connection among local action, but also having a common framework for the different cities department. There is also external benefit at local scales in terms of dissemination, transparency, and accountability, for example. And as mentioned before, there are, of course, external benefit in being part of a network of cities that talks, let's say, the same language and use the same vocabulary in a way. Even though this is very promising, there are many challenging methodologically in the adaptation of the system, the framework of SDGs, which has been designed and implemented for member states, for countries, to the local level. Not only to adapt this national system, but also to adapt an agenda that is global and holistic to the European context and to the local scale in our case. We also thought that compared at the beginning of our work that the number of indicators encompasses in the UN framework was quite ambitious, more than 230 indicators. And we really think that the local monitoring should illustrate the local action and achievement, but also highlighting the contribution to the achievement of the global agenda. When the city started to prepare this voluntary local review a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, they had few references to look at. Now there are much more. Of course, there are examples and also materials provided by city networks or other research organization. And last year we focused on designing a handbook in particular for the indicator part. The European Handbook for SDG Voluntary Local Review has been launched in February this year at the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi. It has been downloaded more than 9,000 times since then. And it, of course, is available on the website. I think it's also among the reference material in the platform that you can directly look for today. The scope of the handbook was really to support European cities that were willing to prepare an SDG voluntary review, offering a framework and a method for the selection of the indicators and a number of examples of already available indicators that cities can really use to design a monitoring framework, a local monitoring framework that was tailored to the local situation, but ensuring also a minimum comparability among cities. That, of course, will be very important in terms of also comparing and benchmarking. The target audience, I would like to stress it again, is the local and subnational authorities. And the main content is really an overview of the existing indicators that cities can possibly use. The first part of the handbook, however, focus on explaining what is a VLR and also gives an overview of the different SDG monitoring systems that exist. It also highlights some of the data challenges that local authorities have to cope with, explain or summarize the recurrent main components that we have seen in the VLRs, because as I told you, there is no fixed structure. And also explain the methodology that we use for the selection of those example indicators that I will explain in a while. The second part, the core part of the handbook, is the second one, which really focus on all the 17 SDGs. So we try to identify 4 to 5 indicators per each SDGs to provide examples really on how to cover all the 2030 Agenda Needs SDGs. How we selected those indicators. The first elements that we took into account, of course, was to look at the goal itself. Then we tried to understand how the goal is reflected in the European context. And we also tried to understand what is the relevance for the goal in cities, in European cities. Then when look at the universe of available local indicators, we try to keep in mind some priorities. First, we look at harmonized official indicators that are available for a broad number of cities in Europe. Then we look at not harmonized official indicators that city might have been collected in the last years, or that are collected by the national statistical offices or other agencies or authorities. Then we look at harmonized experimental indicators, because we really thought that there is, of course, the research and the scientific activities might definitely provide inputs to this, let's say, effort. And then we look also at not harmonized experimental indicators, maybe for that one city calculate, but of course, always with a reference methodology that city might be able to replicate. Keeping all these priorities in mind, we always try also to keep a balance among the 3 dimensions of sustainability, to try to provide really an overview of the different sectors and dimensions. The results is a list of 71 indicators. As I say, these are examples. We don't suggest that cities should pick them all for their VLRs. However, we had quite a balance. We have 2/3 that are official ones, and we also try to match the alignment when it made sense, made an alignment with the indicators included in the Eurostat dataset for SDGs and the UN Global Framework. The kind of sources that we refer to are, of course, coming from Eurostat, for example, but also indicators collected by and calculated by JRC, but also by other organizations like OECD, the European Environmental Agency, or other director generals in the Commission. Of course, we also, as I said, include information or examples from the national statistical systems, local administration, but also NGOs and university, because many cities use data and information from local stakeholders, collected by local stakeholders, including in the VLR. Every goal is introduced in a 2-page that summarize the main elements that we consider in the choice. So the description of the goal, the European dimension, and the local dimension. And then per every indicator, we elaborated a 2-page fiche with some structure elements, because we thought that this handbook should really be easy to go guide for not only for researchers and data experts, but also for public officials to support the choice and to really get them involved. So every indicator has a side bookmark on the left hand, which is more graphic, and then with graphic elements, and then a textual part with the description of the indicator, the European context, and very important comments and limitations, which we really hope that will be considered in the analysis. On the right hand, you find the more technical data, so the metadata. So I would like now to present you briefly a few examples of these indicators that are included in the handbook to give you an idea of the kind of indicators that we included. For example, for SDG 3, the one on health, good health and well-being, we included the adolescents at birth. This is an indicator collected by Eurostat for more than 300 cities every year. It matches with the UN list, and it's very important because it also has strong links with other goals, poverty, education in particular, and gender equality. Another example, this is an example from one city, the city of Helsinki, which is one city that presented a VLR, included the non-native speaking students graduating for upper secondary school. Of course, this is very peculiar to the city of Helsinki. It's a really local challenge, but it's very important to highlight, to measure the performance of the city in these specific fields, because it's really a challenge for the city for the integration of second generation of migrants or citizens of different origins. And of course, it's linked also to the access to jobs and to inequality. Another indicator that we presented for Goal 8, so decent work and economic growth, it's the perception of local labor market. We thought that it was important to also include possibly data on perception. And in this case, this is collected, is an indicator included in the Eurobarometer, which is a periodical exercise that CityRegions and Eurostat runs together. The last edition was released a couple of weeks ago. This is available for 83 cities, but this is run through a scientific method with a survey with high standards. And this is available for cities that are included in this list. Another indicator that is not official, but is experimental, it's for Goal 11, and it's calculated, this is an indicator released by CityRegions for 800 cities, and is about population without green urban areas in their neighborhood. So this is linked to SDG 11.7.1, which has been in one of the indicators in Tier 3, so with not defined methodology at the beginning. Now there is a methodology, but of course the indicators on public space are very hard and expensive to collect. This is one indicator that can be used as a proxy if the city doesn't have the statistical capacity of resources to calculate one. The last one is the bathing site with excellent water quality. And I wanted to include this one because goal 14 is one of the goals that usually has been saying in the past the cities are not, let's say, involved in that much in the achievement of this one. But we also find that there is a possibility also, and there is a link in this case, is one about quality of a kind of public space, which are bathing sites. This is collected for 22,000 bathing sites every year, and it's calculated and released officially by the European Environmental Agency. The last one is the voter turnout in municipal election. This is an indicator that every city has, is not contained in a harmonized European data set. So that's why in this case, we put the example of the Greek municipalities to give a reference. But of course, the statistical information are for sure available in every city. We wanted to highlight that this is a very important indicator, even though, of course, it's not matching any UN list or the EU list of indicators, because in the UN list, you have the national turnout. The third part, this is close the examples. The last part, I would like just to record that the last part of the handbook contains example of VLRs produced and also some reflection on the methodology and the way in which the VLRs can be integrated in the strategic plans of the city. And of course, this work has not been concluded because we are now starting working with a number of cities to test the use of this handbook to improve the methodology and also to review the list of indicators. We are working with a number of organizations in cooperation with other partners to improve this methodology in view of the second edition that we hope to publish by 2022. Which will, of course, review both the methodology, the first and the third part, but also the examples of indicators. We really hope to have a much more wealth of information for the next edition. I close the presentation here. I included some reference, and of course, I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alicia, for that presentation. We are also very excited for that second volume of the handbook. It seems to be very exciting work. I can already see that there's questions in the chat, which I would like to direct directly to you. For example, Professor Dr. Jakob Hörisch is asking if it is intended to develop similar handbooks for rural regions, or would it be able to be argued that this current handbook is also applicable to rural regions? If you can answer that question, please.
Yes, it's very interesting because yesterday I was discussing with another researcher of the European Parliament, and we were discussing about the regional scale. She was asking me, are you working on a regional handbook? I will say that we are not working now on this. We focus on the improvement of this one. This has been very well received. What I would say is that the methodology, some of the reflection, the structure of the handbook might be applied also to other let's say contexts, to rural areas. Of course, the indicators might be very different. I will suggest, or at least recommend, to have a look to some examples of provinces that are mainly rural, like the province of Jaén in Spain. They have developed their own indicator set that is very specifically related to rural areas, and I will recommend to have a look. So it's not in our plan, but the methodology, let's say the framework, might be applied.
Perfect, thank you. And there's another follow-up question along those same lines. And the question is, are European applications of this handbook also going beyond the municipal boundaries at all, or do they typically go straight to the boundaries and stop their evaluation at that border?
This is very important. This is one of the reflection that is in the third part about the boundary that you use to monitor, to design the indicator, to calculate them, and what is in some cases, for example, data on indicator on transportation, you have to include the commuting zone that maybe it's outside the municipal boundary. So the handbook is, let's say, the VLRs usually are promoted and developed by a city administration. So it's also the mandate to monitor, let's say, the scope of the exercise is to monitor the achievement of the SDG in the city. But I will say that for some specific goals or specific indicators, it might be very useful to include also the commuting zone, the functional urban area, metropolitan area, for example. I will say that the recommendation that we included in the handbook is always to try to put the single figure, the indicator, in the context. So within for example, the average in the region or in the country, but also the differences in the trends. So of course, the single indicators cannot give you the answer on how a city is performing on that specific things. It's a more complex analysis. having solid and robust indicator, of course, helps.
Perfect. I find that a very good answer. And I think is exactly finding that context and especially the special role that urban rural contexts can play and kind of going beyond the mandate as you state in your answer. I think that's exactly the main question that we're asking during this conference and gathering input from all the participants. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I would like at this opportunity to ask Anna Zima if we're ready to present some of the results from the poll. If you can please unmute your mic and share your screen, we'll see what the participants have answered so far, and then look to discuss that a little bit in this room. Anna, can you please, put on full screen? So the first question is,
in which field do you work? The majority is saying they working in the academia sector. Yes, and the second question is, in which field do you work? If you choose another, and it's more accurate, where they're working the SDGs, administration, etc. And the third question is, do you have a direct experience in working with territorial data, statistical and/or geo-referenced? The majority is saying yes, but also some people saying no.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Anna. It's interesting to see. So we have a lot of people from academia as well, which makes me think that we have to start to research where these new indicators could be, at least in the context of urban-rural partnerships. And that's where the work will be taken up after the conference. And it's interesting to see that there's many participants that don't directly work with indicators. I feel that we have to expand that realm as well and see how often we can include indicators in our work. Going forward, we will now go to the next presentation from Zara Bentz. She will present on the reference framework for sustainable cities, monitoring and designing of integrated local SDG strategies. Sarah, if you can go ahead and just share your screen. Sarah is the policy advisor working on sustainable development goals at the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, otherwise known as CEMR. CEMR is the European umbrella organization of over 60 national associations from over 40 countries. She also works at Platforma, the pan-European network of local and regional governments and their associations, working on international decentralized cooperation. The Agenda 2030 and its 17 SDGs have been at the core of their work for several years, and they've been working with many members to help better understand the process of SDG localization, and most notably by providing tools such as this reference framework for sustainable cities. And she will present to us today. Sarah, I'm very excited for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Sorry, thank you very much. I'm just unmuting myself and sharing my screen again. Thank you all. It's great to be here with you today, as you mentioned. Karl, in these weird, odd times, it's great that we still manage to connect together and that we actually have this great application to use today to work with all of you and share experiences. I'm just struggling 1 second with my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen, but it's not in full picture mode yet. Maybe if you start now we see the presenter.
Now, okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much. So once again, thank you for having me here today. It's my pleasure to present to you another tool that is being used by cities, regions, local governments, and different stakeholders across Europe and the world to help move forward in our path towards a more sustainable world. So it's called the Reference Framework for Sustainable Cities. Some of you may know about it, some of you may not. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the chat, and our wonderful assistant will help us reach out to them. So what is the reference framework? It's an online tool that helps to guide cities of all sizes to design, implement, and monitor local integrated strategies. So this is a tool that is free of use. It's available for anybody who would like to test it. And it allows users to align themselves to two different frameworks. The first framework is the European vision of sustainable cities. So this European vision is actually put forward by the principles of the Leipzig Charter, the one that was adopted in 2007. It comprises the 30 objectives for a holistic approach to sustainable urban development, and it's structured around the social, economic, environmental dimensions, and we also added and included the urban and territorial dimensions after 2007. The new Leipzig Charter, as our moderator mentioned at the beginning, is going to be adopted in a couple of days. And for us, for CEMR, the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, it's a crucial milestone. We've been actively involved in the revision process of this new framework. And this new framework now will put forward new challenges and objectives for sustainable urban development. It's structured in 3 dimensions, as we know. So it puts forward the green, just, and productive dimension of cities. And these objectives are already based on the principles of the first Leipzig Charter, and this is all already actually included in the reference framework for sustainable cities. So our tool is going to be ready for the new Leipzig Charter when it will come into force, because it also already includes some of the key new kind of themes, we can say, which are common good, the integrated approach, participation and co-creation, multi-level governance, the place-based approach. This is all already featured and incorporated into the tool. So we are looking forward to the next steps of the Leipzig Charter in that. Then we're also aligned very much with the 2030 agenda and the 17 SDGs. So users can choose to be aligned against a European framework or an international framework. So just to give a quick overview of how we got to where we are today. So 2007 was the signature of the Leipzig Charter, where member states agreed upon common principles for urban development. And the year after, in France, during the French presidency, at the Marseille Declaration, there was a decision made by member states to develop a tool to implement these principles. So this tool gave birth, that was the beginning of the reference framework for sustainable cities, also known, I'll refer to it as the RFSC. And we started working on a prototype for the RFSC that was presented in Spain at the Toledo Declaration in 2010. So this prototype was validated and then started a testing phase to see, to make sure that it's actually going to be useful for cities, for regions, and for different users. The testing phase actually reached out to 66 different cities from different countries, from different sizes, really to see how user-friendly it is, also to make sure that the content in it reflects the realities on the ground, and that it comes from a bottom-up approach. Once the tool was finalized, there was a dissemination phase that was provided by support from the European Commission for a couple of years, which helped to gain some traction at EU level. And once the United Nations Development Goals in 2015 were adopted, we decided to integrate those tools, this set of new indicators, into our framework as well, as it was recommended in Amsterdam that the urban agenda for the EU incorporates the Sustainable Development Goals, so we followed the same path. Currently, it's the French ministry that is leading the work on the reference framework for sustainable cities, and it's coordinated by CEMR, so by the secretariat that is based in Brussels. And a novelty for 2020 is that we are now currently discussing with URBACT from DG Regio how to better use this tool and work on localization of the SDGs together. So we are currently discussing the possibility to create a network of cities that can work on the SDGs using the reference framework, mostly smaller and medium-sized cities across Europe. And this will probably start mid-2021. So I'll make sure to keep you informed about that. So the good and one of the strong points of this tool is that it's very flexible. It can be used by different territorial scales. So that was a question that was asked to Alice. What about regional, urban, rural? This tool incorporates all these different dimensions. It can be used by a city. It can also we can also look at the strategic planning of a rural area next to a city. We can focus on the different stages of the planning process. So it's a very comprehensive approach to the localization phase of SDGs. It includes the design phase, the implementation phase, but also the monitoring phase. And it's really a place-based approach because it can be used by any city or any user, let's say, across the world. So it's also very much a tool for capacity building. What is unique in this sense is that it's a self-assessment tool. It really allows a city or a user, let's say, to self-assess, to see where that person is, what do they want to do, how do they want to get there, and adapt and change along the way. It allows for two different integrations, the vertical integration, so really trickling down the global priorities, the European framework into local realities. And it also encourages strongly a horizontal integration because it's a tool that allows users to work across different departments in a municipal city, in a city, for instance, across sectors, and also invites different stakeholders to join. So academia, business, civil society can all also incorporate their inputs and use and learn from this tool, which is really a key point that is encouraged by the 2030 agenda, is policy coherence and the transversality of the SDGs. So this is something that really boosts this aspect of the global and European agendas. It's really a peer learning and knowledge sharing tool because it allows to compare existing strategies and objectives. It really has this user-friendly dimension because it's very colorful. It shows these very ludicrous, very pretty graphs, let's say, that is easy to understand by anybody, by any department, not only the urban planners or the different experts working on the SDGs or the different frameworks. It's something that even a citizen can look at and see, okay, this is where my city is being very active on, is SDG 16. Oh, but we're not doing anything on SDG 6, as you can see in this first little graph up near their objectives. And then it also allows to see the actions that are being implemented to achieve the SDGs, for instance, and compare whether or not these actions meet the ambitions that you have set for yourselves. So in the graph that you see below with the bars, the gray scale is actually the ambitions that you will have identified for your planning, and the colored parts actually measure the current actions that you have in place. So you can identify which gaps you have and where you may need to act a bit more, or you can even identify synergies between different ambitions and actions to see how you can maybe merge and work more efficiently together between departments. So once again, this transversality between different policy areas is very much encouraged and makes more visible here. So as I mentioned also before, it's a tool that can be used anywhere across the world. As you can see, over 70 countries are currently using these tools, cities from all sizes in these countries. In total, those represent 1,800 users, or a bit more actually. And as I said, the tool also is free, it's public, and it allows different stakeholders to use it. So it really encourages this multi-governance, multi-stakeholder approach. How do you use this tool? So very basically, you select the framework, whether you want to align yourself to the European framework or to the UN framework. You determine a plan, so you assess your strategy or your current plan, or if you're starting from really zero and you want to do a whole new plan, you can add all the information that you already have. You see where you are at and where you want to be, so it really reveals your sustainability profile. It allows you to check your actions, as we've seen just before, and visualize potential gaps. And then to complement the phase of localization, it allows you to monitor progress and track progress, especially over time, and allows for different stakeholders to track your own progress, and you can compare each other's progress as well. So for the first phase of assessing your strategy and your plan, for instance, it's since this was assessed by cities themselves, it's really user-friendly because they wanted to make it as simple as possible. We all know that administrative burden at city level is already high enough. So this is just easy in the sense that if you choose, for instance, in this case, the reference framework to align itself to the SDG framework, you have the 17 goals. You see the list of different targets and goals in there, and you just determine yourself whether or not it is a relevant target or relevant goal for your strategic plan. So from 1 to 4, you can determine how important it is for you, whether ending poverty should be number 4, very important, or not at all, number 1. And that's how you come up with this very nice little graph which shows where are your key priority areas in your current plan. What's very interesting with this tool also is that the team leader, the person who creates the first profile, can register other users, of course for free always. These other users can contribute directly by providing inputs. So if somebody is not sure, if you want to involve different departments of your municipality to all contribute with their inputs, they can do it. You can also invite auditors or just partners to look and compare and give their feedback and assign them as a reader, for instance, so that they have access to the data but not necessarily can change it. So it's really, it can include a different variety of partners in the process in this very beginning of your mapping. Then once you've done that, you can then check your actions. And as I also explained, you can determine if your actions meet your ambitions. And once again, it's a very easy framework to use. It's from 1 to 4. You answer the questions that are asked. You determine whether or not it's important, whether or not it's something you're working on. And that's how you can identify where you may need to reinforce your strategy a bit, realign a little bit, or perhaps put it as agree that it's clearly not a priority right now anymore and reallocate resources to a different area. So it's really also a good way for your budget to be better aligned to your ambitions. And then monitoring. So this is where the reference tool, it's not a list of indicators. It doesn't provide indicators that we've created. It makes available a portfolio of indicators in the form of an indicator sheet that includes the description, justification, required data, calculation methods, and sources. So this is the result from a comprehensive work that has been conducted by a panel of experts composed by city experts, but also representative from member states. And these sources so include the reference framework, but also from Eurostat. So you can see here the list below. We also refer to the European Environmental Agency, as well as other key European projects and key performance indicators for sustainable development. Hopefully one day we can also include the handbook of voluntary reviews. This is something that we are going to discuss with Alice. Maybe that can be something to also add into there as a next step. The indicators are aligned with the specific objectives of the framework selected. So for instance, for each SDG in this case, but also if you select the European framework, it will be the same for the European framework. Since the reference framework is a self-assessment tool, it is really up to the municipalities to build their own monitoring framework, to select the indicators that are available from the tool, but they can also add their own list of indicators to monitor their strategies. So this is also a very good place for them to experiment, let's say, and test new indicators. When they create their first profile, it is a private profile, and you can decide later on to make it public. So you can decide later on to share your profile with other users. And it really encourages also the learning and peer learning between users, and they can see what kind of indicators you've used. So it also encourages discussion around this whole part of the SDG strategy. So once again, just really gives a full overview of the different steps, context analysis, from the context analysis all the way to the integrated SDG strategy. You start by coordinating with your team, you present the results to your team, you can present results to citizens as well, to engage with them directly, with partners, stakeholders, like academia, private sector. You improve your strategy together, and then you have this final strategy that helps you develop a monitoring and evaluation system and helps track progress for the long term. This is just an example of one of the users of the reference framework. It's a really good example because it's the city of Saint-Fons in France. It's a rural area next to Lyon. So they really wanted to design a local sustainable development strategy that was in line with the SDGs, especially in an area which was very industrialized before. So they really wanted to reboost that area, give life to it, bring the SDGs to the citizens themselves. So they use a reference framework to assess their current strategy. And they managed to determine through a comprehensive work with the different teams in their offices, in their local administrations, and with elected representatives, because you always also need to work with political backup. They managed to identify the current state of play. So they realized that 70% of their actions at the time that they were starting were actually focused only on 5 of their SDGs. So it raised awareness on the need to strengthen the holistic and integrated approach of their local policies to have a more balanced local strategy. So this is where they started to go into a real co-creation, participation phase linked to the 2030 agenda. So they structured workshops around this new need. They had different SDG clusters. They involved over 60 partners from 60 partners, local actors with over 150 participants. And through this phase of co-creation, they managed to identify new priorities that they realized are necessary to really boost the city life that they have, that citizens identified as a priority. So that's SDG 3, SDG 9, and SDG 12. So they received in total over 400 additional contributions from partners, ideas on how to improve the city. And this was also thanks to the reference framework in the sense that they used the results that they had, they used the graphs, they showed where they're at, they managed to input together the ambitions that they were working on and the actions that they were working on and see which action needed more support, which ambition was maybe too high or too low. So it had it allowed them to really have a better understanding of the interlinkages and the integrated approach of local policies and actions. And it really reinforced collaboration between different actors and actually started a new form of governance within the city. So this is really just one small example. There are many other users that have their profiles public online that you can have a look at. And of course, on our side, we're happy to share with you any questions that you may have. Don't hesitate to register. As I said, you can test it. It's a tool that is being used a lot by academia because a lot of students are using it to learn how to do urban planning. So you can create a private profile and just see what it means to start strategizing, implementing, and monitoring an urban plan, an urban sustainable development plan. So yes, don't hesitate to refer back to me. And there are also some videos online that we can share with you later if needed. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that very wonderful presentation. I was particularly inspired by the example that you gave in the functional urban area of Lyon. And it seems to me, if I understand you correctly, and please feel free to correct me, that the SDGs number 3 for well-being, the number 9 for infrastructure, as well as number 12 for consumption, seem to be some emerging areas for these functional urban areas when we look beyond the city boundaries. Would you agree with that?
Yes, exactly. And this was also something that citizens themselves identified as important. They really put forward their own local needs, and that's also where different stakeholders, so the business and academia sector, highlighted the role that they play in these different SDGs. So that was the whole point, was to have this kind of new form of governance, this co-creation spirit, as I said, which is very much encouraged both by the Leipzig Charter and by the UN Sustainable Development Framework. So it was a great output. It's one of the inspirational examples that we have, among others, of course.
Perfect. There is one question from the chat, which I'll pose right now. How could we evaluate urban-rural partnership concepts using the RFSC? So how could we evaluate these partnerships as they exist in the territory?
Well, that I will have to look into a bit more, but I think you can definitely add, of course, in your list of ambitions also, since urban-rural is really a reflection also of the interlinkages between the SDGs. I guess you can see that if your ambitions and your actions are quite weak in some SDGs, let's say, for instance, in the protection of land or in farming or even water, for instance, then you can see that your partnership, that your work that is focused mainly on urban is not focusing enough on rural and vice versa. So I guess that this whole holistic overview that you get with the reference framework allows you to identify also whether or not your work on urban and rural is balanced or not. And it's something that you can self-assess, but also ask others to assess with you. Other partners, other cities who have a similar profile as yours, or even other stakeholders, if you're not sure of your own situation. So that's the added value also, is to be able to share those results and give the right to other participants to provide their inputs to your current self-assessment strategy. So maybe that can help.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that answer. And I think it also is a little bit of a reference to the first presentation we had from Alicia, the context in which we find ourselves to
Yes.
evaluate which priorities we have is also very important to keep in mind with this topic. But thank you very much for your presentation. And with that, we'll go to our third presentation of the session by Dr. Florian Koch and Dr. Kerstin Krellenberg. They will present on the presentation with the title Fairly Best Friends, SDGs in Light of the Digitalization and Sustainable Development in Urban Areas. Just for an introduction, Florian Koch is Professor for Smart Cities, Real Estate Management, and Urban Development at the University of Applied Sciences, HTW, in Berlin. And Kerstin Krellenberg is Professor at the Department of Geography and Regional Research and Head of the Working Group Urban Studies at the University of Vienna. Florian Koch and Kerstin Krellenberg work on the topic of localization of the SDGs and urban transformation to sustainability and have published articles on SDG indicators, science practice transfer, and urban transformation. They've coordinated 2 working groups on the urban perspective of the SDGs within the German Futures Earth Network. We are very excited for your presentation. Florian Koch, Kerstin Krellenberg, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction and also warm welcome from our side. So I'm speaking to you from Vienna and my colleague Florian Koch is in Berlin. So we are happy to join you today in the session in Leipzig or wherever you are over the world. Our presentation, I think, fits very well to the other 2 presentations that we heard already, because we in our work focused very much on looking on how cities are dealing in implementing the indicators. So this support that is now provided, that we learn about, is, I think, very important for the cities in order to implement. And next slide, please. We are going to talk today a bit more about the digitalization aspect. So the content or the interlinkages between the SDGs, the data, the indicators, and what digitalization can support or what can hinder the implementation of the SDGs. So we are looking at smart city, smart region approaches, talking a bit about what cities really do and what they need. And we have like a small case study presented from Berlin, from some more in-depth research that has been done. And we will talk about the synergies and trade-off. So next slide, please. So what we already heard about all the SDGs and the difficulties or challenges in implementing the SDGs on the local level, and the challenges of data that was already mentioned. So where can be different data, where are the data sources? How can we quantify the indicators that are provided or elaborated at the local level? Here, the Agenda 2030 does not give much advice so far. So if you have a look at the Agenda 2030, I think digitalization or digital is only mentioned once in the whole document. So it was not really at the fore when the Agenda 2030 was developed. On the other hand side, we see, of course, that there are many smart city, smart region approaches that are now ongoing, and then of course can help to optimize and also interconnect between urban and rural regions, for example, in order to support the sustainable development of cities and city regions. So in this context, data is of course a very big issue. So the question is about how can we collect the data in order to quantify the indicators. And here, of course, we have, first of all, the official data that comes from different statistical departments. But we have, of course, other data that we can use in order to quantify data and indicators. So when we think about citizen science approaches, when we think about all the smart data approaches, and also sensors, if you think about air quality issues or noise that can be measured by sensors. And that kind of data can, of course, also be used in order to support the implementation of the SDGs. So, and if we look at one example, when in the city of Barcelona, when they talked about noisy places, and they gave citizens sensors in order to measure noise in their environment. And at the beginning, it was quite challenging. But then when they started to explain people why they are measuring and what is the outcome of the measurements and how the data can be used in order to support sustainable development, this was very much appreciated by the people, and they started to really even more contribute with collecting data. But of course, we are facing challenges when it comes to data privacy, the protection of data. This is all the issues that you know, and the management. The more data we have, what do we do with all the data? Who manages the data? And how is it made accessible to the people, and also in order to support then the quantification of indicators? And of course, we also have to speak about the digital divide. So whenever we ask people to contribute, or about also smart regions approaches, for example, do these regions already have the access to digital or good connection of the internet? So the question at the end is, who really benefits if we work on digitalization in the context of urban sustainable development? So next slide, please. So looking a bit more on smart city approaches and smart region approaches, we see that often those approaches are coming from private companies. So private companies are approaching cities in order to work on smart city approaches. And on the other hand side, we see the communities, the cities that are developing their city strategies. And in these strategies, they now have the big challenge in order to bring two cross-cutting issues together. On the one hand side, sustainable urban development, and another cross-cutting issue that is digitalization. So here is like a challenge to bring it, to bring the two issues together. And when we look at what different cities are doing, we see, of course, that digitalization, those kind of smart city approaches, when you think about smart metering, when you think about smart grids or smart parking issues, that they can, of course, contribute a lot to sustainability. They can be used as a catalyst and also like an enabler. But we always have to have in mind that those can, of course, have negative side effects. So when you think about the more digitalization you use, the more energy you also are producing or using. And so you have or might have also ecological and social negative outcomes. So wherever you possible, it's of course important to balance between the benefits and the negative outcomes that digitalization might bring. So next slide, please. So we have this double major task, how we would call it. So you have on the one hand side the opportunity to use digitalization and more smart city, smart region approaches in order to solve maybe also some old problems, so that we have since a long time with us. But on the other hand side, we also have these possible negative effects, and that might produce new problems that we have to deal with. So when we look at the next slide, we have, or what, from our perspective, from a science perspective, what do we think that city needs? So they really need reliable data and also the ownership of data. So in this context, the question is how to bring the different data sources together, but also how to make this open to the public. So the whole open data approaches are also very important in this context. And when we talked about citizens and about how to involve them, we think that innovations always need to be user-centric. So in order to really support the needs of the citizens and to make it explicit to them the benefits and also the challenges. And of course, this always needs to be problem-oriented approaches. So digitalization can be used wherever and in whatever sense, but to really face the challenges and tackle problems, and then to try to combine digitalization and the SDGs, we see as a very important issue. And from this more general thoughts of us, I would now hand over to my colleague Florian, who's going to go more in some detail and examples from Berlin.
Hello, also from my side. Thank you, Kerstin, for these comments. I'm going to present an example of SDG implementation in one district of Berlin. This is the district of Treptow-Köpenick. The district of Treptow-Köpenick is working currently on a SDG-oriented sustainability strategy. So we have a municipal strategy to implement sustainable development. And the idea of the district was to orient this towards the SDGs. And like other cities, the district had the challenges, how to localize the SDGs. So how to localize the global goals on a local level. What might be the indicators? What indicators can be used which make sense on this local level? Also, what data is available? What data can be used? The idea was to do this kind of process in a participative way, leaving no one behind as one of the main issues of the SDGs should be also implemented, obviously, on the local level, and also to make the process transparent. So not following a top-down process, but try to put up the SDGs like a bottom-up process. And the question also, who's implementing the SDGs? It's often seen as a municipal task, but I think it's also people from civil society, companies, other kind of actors are also needed to implement the SDGs because they are so global and so complex that only one actor might fail in implementation. What we did, and this was part of a research practice project, which the university implemented together with the district of Treptow-Köpenick, was to follow a twofold approach. So first, we analyzed what might be general indicators to monitor sustainability. And then, in a second step, we decided that we need also specific SDG-related measures, SDG-related action of the sustainability strategies. And I'm going to present very quickly how we proceeded and what role digitalization played in this process. So first of all, and this is also following a little bit the presentations from Sarah and from Alicia, we also had the challenge, what might be indicators for measuring sustainable development in Treptow-Köpenick. And we choose about the, Alicia told it, the universe of SDG indicators, and we try to think, okay, what might work for the district of Treptow-Köpenick? Then we saw, is the indicator relevant for the specific situation in this Berlin district? Then the task check. Can the respective indicator be influenced by actions at the district level? There are some issues of sustainable development which take place, but which can't be influenced by the municipality because it's on a bigger level. Also, data availability and quality was a big issue. What data is available in the district office? Which alternative data sources exist? Was Kerstin told us about sensor data, is probably other kind of data. And then we selected our indicators. The idea was to have a manageable number of indicators. We had around 60 indicators with themes on specific topics where we know that there's data available and that there's also good data available. We also try to involve the issue of digitalization and put it as an indicator for SDG 9 and said, okay, the percentage of households with broadband coverage is one possible indicator to put also digitalization. So we had a general overview on how sustainable development is developing in Treptow-Köpenick following the each of the SDGs. We had other indicators, like for example, for SDG 8, the unemployment rate. We had also more indicators which were related to the local situation. In Treptow-Köpenick, there's a big swimming lake, and we had one indicator which was measuring the depth of visibility of this lake as a very touchable indicator. We then did another process which said, okay, we have now a possibility to do a monitoring system on how sustainable development is developing in our district. But we thought, okay, we might somehow need some action to involve also the citizens. So the idea was, or we realized, this was kind of difficult in Corona times, you can imagine, a participation process. For each of the SDGs, we invited civil society, we invited enterprises from the district to discuss with us, okay, what do you think about SDG 7? What does SDG 7, what role does SDG 7 play in your work, in your districts? And the idea was to identify several concrete actions, concrete measures for each SDG indicator. So we had very small scale actions. For example, renting of cargo bikes should increase. We should provide free renting of cargo bikes in our districts. Or for SDG 11, for SDG 17, we had the amount of fair trade coffee in youth clubs should increase. So very small scale measures which might not have an immediate effect on the general indicators of the SDGs, but which is important to have like implementable, which are measures, actions which can be implemented in a couple of months to see some progress going on. Also, we put digitalization as a measure, and there was the idea to make science business practice cooperation and help small and medium enterprises through workshops organized by academia on how to digitalize their work. The indicators, we also try to find indicators for these small scale measures. These indicators are not anywhere, they can't be found from official sources. So we needed there to work really on the ground to ask the companies if they could provide us the data for these smaller measures in order to have like this twofold process, monitoring the general situation of urban development in Treptow-Köpenick, and on the other hand, also monitoring these small-scale measures. The next step, and are now we collected already the data. The next step would then visualize this data, and the presentations from Alicia and Sarah gave a lot of input for me to think how could we visualize our findings there. As going one step back and thinking in general about digitalization and the SDGs, from our findings, from the practice example, we can see that obviously, as Kerstin said, digitalization is not a part of the SDGs, but we see it as an important objective, as an important target. And I think the SDG is such a broad framework, so it is also possible to put digitalization as an objective, as a target in it. But obviously, digitalization is also an instrument for data collection and for analysis. Now, here we come to another issue about open data, who owns the data, which we might discuss later. Also, a communication tool. I mean, everything is online, so it's far more easier to make the process of SDG implementation transparent. And this way, it's also a way to enhance SDG implementation in civil society and economy. We, coming from a science perspective, found this very interesting, and we see there's a lot of going on, and we see that also science should involve, or should be involved in SDG implementation, in research on SDGs. And one topic would be then the digitalization and the SDGs. There, I think the issue of the double major task, so provide evidence on side effects of digitalization by analyzing the economic, social, and ecological impacts. So what positive aspects can digitalization have? What negative aspects might emerge? And also in helping from a science perspective, supporting cities developing these integrated approaches and monitoring system as currently the city administrative structure somehow doesn't go along with the idea of the SDGs to have it like a more integrated approach. So this would be further steps where we see a possibility for science, for academia to be involved in SDG implementation. Thank you very much for listening to us, and we are happy to answer questions or comments from your side.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that presentation as well from my side. I would like to say a question myself. Perhaps you have an answer as well. When I saw the case study in Treptow, Köpenick, I was wondering if you mainly focused on small scale indicators, as you said. Did you see any influence given the context of Berlin being the largest city in Germany, or also with the district to the rural areas? And if not, I understand it's a very specific question. What do you see any maybe potentials for further research in that area?
The district itself is somehow kind of includes rural areas and more urban areas. So what we haven't done yet, but what would be the next step, to look on a more small scale issue, so to see how the different neighborhoods are developing. There we have the problem of data issues, no, because not all of the data is available on this neighborhood level, but as the neighborhoods are that different, there might be different developments, there might be also different objectives. Currently, our aim was to involve a broad civil society group. We had for each of the workshops around 40, 50 participants. So the next step would then to go into the neighborhoods. The whole of Berlin, there obviously are some of the measures which can't be influenced by this district. For example, we spoke about how school canteens could provide more healthy and more ecological food. But on a district level, this can't be influenced because it's on the whole scale of Berlin, which is organizing these issues. So this is kind of the district is some kind of intermediate, in an intermediate position. Some things can't be influenced and something can be influenced.
Very important point. Thank you for explaining that further. I'll go to a question now from the chat from Lara Jans-Klinker. She's wondering if you can please explain how you deal with concerns of data protection. And she adds the comment to that, people tend to be more aware about this issue when it comes to public and governmental data collection or digital projects, while they're willing to share their personal data with private companies at the same time. So there's this kind of discrepancy, if you can please address that.
I can do it in a specific case, and probably Kerstin can add. Yeah, this is an issue. I mean, we don't use individual data on individual persons. So this is something. The most of the data we use are from official sources, which are already available. Our idea is now to collect this and to make it more visible. We also have data from companies, and our idea is to include the companies in the monitoring, saying a company which is renting, for example, these cargo bikes, no? Wouldn't you be interested in supporting and be patronizing this indicator and giving us the data? So this is our idea of involving also private data. But again, we're not using any kind of individual data from individuals. it's all anonymized. So this, but it's obviously an issue which need to be discussed in detail for each of the indicators.
It's interesting to hear how you kind of go around that issue by addressing other stakeholders and pulling in their resources while still taking into consideration the data protection requirements. So I find that very exciting. We have one more question directly for you, Florian, if you would please. Do you know of any example of research works on SDG trade-offs at the local level? Alicia is asking this actually.
This I would also ask Kerstin. There might be, and I'm happy to share it. I mean, there's the whole idea of trade-offs in the SDGs, which is very prominent in the research. But on a local level, to do this systematic, probably Kerstin, you know something right now. I would be interesting to think about it. But we haven't found yet anything.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most challenging issues that we still have, and I would happy to also push this forward whenever I can. So I think this really needs interdisciplinary work. So we really have to cross borders, and maybe also it's not enough to say we as urban scientists are already interdisciplinary, but it needs more support from also the natural scientists. So I think here you really need a good network, and also the interest, the will of people to work together, and then having this approach also means to involve the people then. So this is really, for me, it's an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach that we have to follow up. And yeah, I very much hope that we will get there in order to provide more good examples on how to work on that.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. We also have the comment from Sarah. Would you like to maybe say in the room really quick?
Yes, it was just that it's also a very important question for us, the spill-off and the trade-off effects of the SDGs, the policy coherence, as I was mentioning, also to have this holistic overview of how one policy affects others within a city, but between cities, and on my side as well, especially I look at the international dimension between cities in partner countries. So that's a work that I know that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network does on a national level. And I think it's something that we can all discuss together maybe at a next meeting, but they are interested at working on it at a local level, but they need support. So maybe if other participants out there are interested also in joining forces, so we can maybe push forward for something at that level with them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that additional remark. I would like to invite the participants as well to keep on writing your comments and your questions into the chat. We will take them up. We still have about 10 minutes time to freely discuss. I'll mention also there is the opportunity to use one of the tables in the information foyer. You find that in the first point in the agenda, and it's there where the participants can meet with each other and use a Jitsi room as a video conferencing tool live right now. So if after this session you want to talk about this topic more and exchange ideas and input, please feel free to go to the information foyer, find one of the tables. They're tabled 1 through 9, or yeah, there should be about 9 tables there, where you can then enter into conversations directly with other people in this session. Maybe as a final question, if I may pose it to all the speakers, I would like to challenge you and ask what you believe is the most challenging aspect of making an urban rural indicator or working on the way towards such an indicator. What are some 1 or 2 challenges that you maybe identify, or the potential that you see with the cooperation between urban and rural areas? And if possible, I would like to start with you, Sarah, as the first presenter, and then I'll ask the others as well.
Thank you very much, Karl, for this question. It's a very interesting question because it does have these 2 angles to it. It has challenges, but it also has a lot of opportunities. Really, in terms of opportunities, I think you have to consider the fact that it's a way of using the SDG framework to really bridge gaps, and digitalization, for instance, as was presented just now by our friends Kirsten and Florian, is a key means also, I believe, to bridge the gaps between rural and urban, hoping that, of course, there's the right connectivity first, but once it's there, then it's a great way to make sure that everybody's on the same page. The problem is, of course, is the available data at rural level, I guess. Urban is always easier, especially for bigger sized cities. Once you go down to medium or smaller sized cities, that is becoming very tricky to have this data, to keep this data updated, of course, and accessible and free of rights, and all the different questions that came up also regarding data protection. So that is even more difficult at rural level. So on my side, I think that would be something we need to focus on, is really the access to data, encourage national statistics offices to focus also at the disaggregated level as much as possible, work together hand in hand with cities and identify the rural areas that need extra support to really make sure that at all levels of governance, we have that attention brought to it, and then we can focus again better on the opportunities that come along.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And of course, Alicia, I didn't forget you as well. Would you also be willing to give a comment? Where are the main challenges? Where are the main potentials of indicators on the urban-rural scale?
Yes, this is a very relevant question, and I see many challenges. Not only one, both. I mean, in terms of methodologies, but also in terms of data management, on data dissemination. Of course, there are now European regulation, national regulation on data management that provides an umbrella, but there is an issue with the local capacities in data management. Most of these processes are very expensive. And so there are, of course, priorities for local administrations that need to be tackled. So, of course, it's also a matter of assessing, distributing the budget and the resources. My impression working with and dialing with a number of local administration and also provinces is that most of the time informations are collected. They are not, let's say, disseminated easily or made available easily because this is the most expensive part. As Sarah was mentioning, maintaining a system of, for example, an open data platform for a public administration, the creation and the maintainment is very costly. So probably most of the work for cities embarking in this process of starting this process of review or of monitoring is to really to find where informations are, and then go to talk to different departments or different authorities to find data. In some other cases, especially in the case when you want to analyze urban-rural linkages, the problem is much more in the methodology. The way you design the indicator, the kind of, let's say, issue that even the question, what do you want to measure? And that is why I see great opportunities in new techniques for data, for the calculations. I come for the field, I've been working with the remote sensing data for some years, and I know that there is a great potential, but it's still very, in a way, a new field scientifically. But this is very promising. So I know that, especially in the Commission, but also in European agencies, we work a lot on the development of new methodology. So probably if we will run the same roundtable in 2 or 3 years, we will have completely different results. And this is also the most exciting part of this work. So I'm really hopeful.
Exactly. I'm also very hopeful for the future and the way that the work will develop. We've identified many issues here. Really quick, the same question to Florian and Kirsten. What challenges, what opportunities do you see with urban-rural indicators, especially with view of digitalization?
Okay, maybe I can start, Brian. Well, I think indicators overall are very meaningful. And I think the process of developing meaningful indicators is the most challenging. So where do we start from? So when we think about urban challenges and even urban rural challenges, to make a decision on what are the most important challenges that we want to tackle and what do we want to do with these indicators. So it's at the end the aim to start comparison and to also make monitoring possible. So there's so many different meanings I think indicators have, and this is challenges because it can also be like going in one direction or the other in saying that can have positive and negative effects when we're working with indicators. And then, of course, the whole issues that we already mentioned, talking about data issues, about monitoring, about evaluation issues. I think there are many, many challenges, and I'm not sure what will the best way for cities, communities, for rural areas to start this process of discussing what are meaningful indicators. And I think the work that we just learned about from Alicia and Sarah is very important in this regard. On the other hand side, we need also further research and working together with the municipalities, with people. So yeah, I think the challenges are still, yeah, there are many challenges, but we are on a good way of developing this further.
Perfect. Florian, final words?
Quickly, I mean, yeah, probably another aspect would be not only what should we measure, but also do we want to measure it? I mean, in a political sense, these data which we are collecting can be used also in a sense which might not be good. I mean, if an indicator says that the community, that the city of, I don't know, is developing in a bad way. So the mayor would think about, well, do I really need to measure this? So probably also think about what might be the political implications for this and how to gain political support for measuring sustainable development.
Yeah, perfect. And also a very important additional comment as well. Perfect. I would like to invite all the participants to continue this conversation in one of the tables in the information foyer. Please feel free to do so. And otherwise, I thank you all. Thank you to the speakers for presenting very interesting results today. And we look forward to the future work. Thank you.
Thank you.